Well, I'm hoping, especially for the young people, that the thoughts I have this morning will be particularly useful for you too. And I'll begin with a bit of a challenge. So how are these four things linked? Mental health, reality TV, you and me, and 2 Corinthians. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if you would say that there's no link at all between any of those four things. However, they are linked in my mind, which perhaps to you is evidence of a very twisted mind. But let me explain. So let's start with the link between mental health and reality TV. So some time ago, I happened to read an article about the serious mental health struggles that were experienced by people who had been on a reality TV show. But first of all, does everyone know what a reality TV show is? Does anyone not know? Well, I can see a shaking head there. So a reality TV show probably has very little to do with reality. What's real about it is that there are real people taken like from the public. They're not normally actors, and they're put into particular situations, very contrived, very unreal, and they're made to compete with each other. Well, anyway, according to this article that I read, which was, I think, last year now, at least 38 people around the world had taken their own life after having been on a reality TV show. And in the UK, it said that there had even been a parliamentary inquiry into the issue of people committing suicide after having been on a reality TV show. So it is a serious matter, a very serious matter, even though it's reality TV shows, I guess, but yes, serious. And when I saw the headline linking the two things, mental health and reality TV, I thought, well, what's going on here? I didn't think that there would be a connection between those two things. And the answer that was given in this article was that those people had experienced huge psychological damage and damage to their reputations as a consequence of being on one of those shows. And this article gave examples of people who had suffered greatly after being on a reality TV show. And there was this story of a young Sydney man who he'd been out with his friends one night, and he happened to have been spotted by a reality TV show producer, and he was invited to take a screen test, and he thought, oh, this will be a lot of fun. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. So he went in for the test, and the test involved a very long interview where he was asked lots of questions, particularly about his views and opinions about relationships, okay? And it's fair to say that he had some fairly traditional views about relationships, and this became a bit of an issue later on. And anyway, that man was accepted onto the show, and then in the weeks that followed, he was involved in its production. And then a bit after that, this show went to air in Australia, and then he received a phone call from one of the producers to let him know that he was going to be featured in a national advertising campaign. And he thought, well, that's going to be great. This is great fun, and people are going to see me. This will be really good. But no, the reason for that call was to warn him that there might be a backlash following this advertising campaign. And the next day, the campaign went live with ads everywhere on websites and on billboards around the country. And those ads showed a big picture of him, along with a little quote, an extract from those interview questions that he'd been asked weeks before. It included a little thing that he had said. And in the way that this quotation was presented with his big picture there on the screen, it looked very provocative, right? It really was a bit out there. And again, that had something to do with his traditional views about relationships. And sure enough, after this campaign went live, his phone started to run hot with people calling him and sending him messages, family and friends shocked at what he had said, people calling to abuse him. He even received death threats, and you can imagine what impact it would have had on that young man. And it didn't just stop there. He happened to be involved in running a business, and as a consequence of that campaign, his business partners decided to separate from him, to break ties with his business. So that experience of being part of a reality TV show had come at a great cost for that young man. It caused him a great deal of mental anguish, damage to his relationships, damage to his reputation. And he felt that he had been deliberately misrepresented by the show. Also that show could attract a greater audience and then, of course, produce a greater profit. So, you may be wondering, well, what has that to do with you and me? Well, hopefully none of you have any kind of ambition to be on a reality TV show. So there's no way that any of us could have our pictures and our comments put out there in front of a national audience for people to make comments and judgments about us. There's no way that we could do that, is there? Well, of course, yes, we can. That's exactly what we can do. Using Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, YouTube, and many other internet sites, that's exactly what we can do. Social media apps allow us to do exactly that, so that anyone on the planet can publish content about themselves, so that anyone else on the planet can see that content and make comments about it. And those comments can be helpful, but sometimes they can be very unhelpful. So, courtesy of these social media apps, we can find ourselves being publicly judged and rated and subjected to all kinds of unkind criticisms and attacks, just like those people we were talking about before who competed on reality TV shows. So we also can experience damage to our reputations, damage to our mental well-being because of this kind of public scrutiny. So, how is all of this then linked to Paul's second letter to the Corinthians? Well, not long after I had read that article about those issues with reality TV shows, Bronwyn and I happened to be finishing reading through 2 Corinthians. And as I was reflecting on that letter, I was wondering, well, what sort of practical lessons are there in 2 Corinthians that I can sort of take away and apply to myself? And, as I thought through that, I was kind of struggling to think of anything. And the reason for that, I think, is that Paul's letter to the 2 Corinthians is a very personal letter from him to the Corinthian believers. And in that letter, Paul talks more about himself, I think, than all of his other letters combined. The letter is largely dealing with his relationship with those Corinthian believers and some of the issues that had developed with that relationship. So it all seemed very personal to him and very personal to his relationship with the Corinthians. So how how could this letter be relevant to us today? And then it kind of dawned on me that the issues that he was grappling with in 2 Corinthians are actually quite similar to the kinds of issues that we've just been talking about in relation to social media. So if you think about it, the Apostle Paul had a very public profile. He travelled internationally. He preached to many people. And there were people out there who were making very unkind comments about him, who were attacking his reputation. And that was potentially very damaging to the Apostle Paul and to his preaching. So in 2 Corinthians, we read about how he handled those issues, and I think we can learn from what he wrote. And so it turns out that 2 Corinthians, this letter that was written in the first century, I think is very relevant to the challenges that we face in the 21st century. So when we were reading through 2 Corinthians chapter 10 earlier, did you happen to notice that there were people who were making very insulting comments about Paul's physical appearance and his ability as a speaker? So in verse 10 of chapter 10, he wrote, "They say his letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech of no account." Now that wasn't very nice, was it? But that's what people were saying about the Apostle Paul, and this had come back to him. He'd heard about it. Imagine if people were saying that kind of thing about you or about me. Her Instagram videos are amazing, but she's actually quite a disappointment when you meet her. Or, his Facebook posts, they're excellent, but he's not at all impressive when you meet him in person. I think we would all be deeply hurt if people were saying that kind of thing about us. So, why do people make those sorts of criticisms? Often it is because putting others down makes them feel superior. Those people making derogatory comments about Paul were trying to show that they were superior to him, that they were better speakers than he was, that they were better teachers than he was. So, how did the Apostle Paul respond to those criticisms? Verse 12, he said, "When they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are not wise." It is not wise, Paul said, for people to be measuring themselves or comparing themselves with each other. And yet, we all do it. We all have this tendency to be comparing ourselves with others to see whether we are better or whether we are worse, and it's not good. Paul says it is unwise. It is not healthy for us to be doing this. It's something I think we do a lot, especially when we are young, and I think that's very understandable. I can still remember what it was like being a teenager, and Johnny's probably a bit surprised that I can say that, but I do remember, and I can remember coming out of that sort of very protected childhood world, going through puberty and adolescence, and it's just natural that as you're growing, you wonder, well, how do I compare with other people? How do I compare? What shape will I have? How attractive or fast or strong will I be compared to other people? And I well remember becoming very self-conscious when I was a teenager, blushing a lot, becoming very sensitive about what others thought about me. That was my experience, and I expect for many of you, you can relate to that, having that same experience as you've been growing up. And it can be quite distressing. So the Apostle Paul warns us against this, comparing ourselves with others. But he also warns against judging people based on their appearance. And that comes out in verse 7 of 2 Corinthians 10, where he says, "Do you look at things according to the outward appearance?" Now, your version might have it a little bit different to that, but there's a very similar thought in 2 Corinthians 5 when he's referring to his critics, and he says in verse 12 of 2 Corinthians 5, those who boast, he describes these critics as people who boast about outward appearance and not about what is in the heart. Now that expression sounds very familiar to me. Can anyone, is there an echo of anything there to anyone else? Can you think of anything from the Old Testament, perhaps? Someone else who might have said that? Samuel, right. It's in that story about Samuel when he went to anoint a king, and it's actually what God said. So this is 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. "Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." God is not interested in our outward appearance. He is interested in our hearts. And that's the kind of mindset that we each also need to develop. Okay, there's that guy again. And perhaps I shouldn't have invited you to make a comparison between me and him, especially a comparison that's based on appearance. But here's another challenge for you. Looking at the photo of this man, do you think he was a good man or a bad man? Any ideas? Any thoughts? Oh, I think someone said maybe a bad man. All right. Well, that man, his name was Klaus Barbie, and he was a Nazi, and he was called the Butcher of Leeuwen in France because he was personally involved in torturing Jews and members of the French resistance. So he definitely was not a good person. What about this photo, this woman here? Would you say that she is a good person or a bad person? Well, be careful what you say. That's my mum. That's my mum when she was about 19. And to me, she's a very good-hearted woman. But the point is that there's no way that you can, look to the heart of a person just by having a picture or a video of them. Even if we know a person well, we don't necessarily know exactly what is going on in their heart. There can be corners of their heart that we will never see. So if all we have is an image of a person, just their appearance, it's impossible, isn't it, for us to make any kind of judgment or assessment about them and about what's going on in their heart. And yet, what we get through the internet is an avalanche of images and videos, many of which have been filtered and edited and very staged. And that means it's really impossible for us to have this godly mindset of looking to the heart and not to the appearance when all we've got is just a picture. So it's no wonder that in recent times that more people, younger generations especially, have struggled with this whole problem of appearance and how so many people have anxieties about body image and appearance. So consider these statistics that were published on the ABC website a little while ago. In Australia, more than 43% of people are highly concerned about their body image, according to Monash University's Body Image Research Group. Well, that's kind of interesting. There is such a group in the first place, isn't there? A body image research group. In a study of over 3,000 mostly female Australians aged 18 and over, the Butterfly Foundation found that over 70% said appearance was very important and wished that they could change the way that they looked. Roughly one-fifth of the respondents had attempted to change themselves to look like the images that they had seen on social media, and nearly half felt pressure to look a certain way. So I think there's no question that social media has greatly increased our ability to compare ourselves with each other, and often to come to very negative conclusions about ourselves. Final quote from a Professor Widows from the University of Birmingham. She said, "We have an epidemic of body image anxiety, and we have to move away from that." And she was right. Just like the Apostle Paul said, we should not judge by appearance, or be measuring and comparing ourselves against each other. And I'd like to think that as we get a bit older, we grow a bit wiser, and that we would be less inclined to do this kind of thing, but unfortunately that's not the case. We continue to do it. And we say things like, or think things like, what kind of car do you have? What suburb do you live in? How big is your house? What qualifications do you have? What job do you have? How much are you paid? How many children or grandchildren do you have? And what schools do they go to? What sporting or academic accomplishments have they achieved? How well are you aging? And so it goes on and on. Instead of judging by appearance and making these comparisons with others, well, what should we be doing? Verses 17 and 18 of 2 Corinthians, Paul wrote, "Let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. For it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends." So instead of measuring ourselves against other people, maybe looking for ways in which we might seem superior, we should be boasting in the Lord. We should be boasting about what the Lord has accomplished, about His gospel, His salvation, His kingdom. That's the way that followers of Christ should be thinking. Our focus should be on the Lord and not on ourselves. And when it comes to our sense of self-worth, the value that we place on ourselves, what is more important? Is it the opinions and comments of people out there on social media, people we may not even know? Or is it the opinion of our God who created the universe, who created each one of us, and who knows each one of us intimately, who truly can look on our hearts. Well, I think it's pretty obvious, isn't it, whose opinion is more important. We want to be people whom God commends. It is the opinion of the Lord that counts. But what if we see someone who is better than us? Or maybe we see someone who is worse than us. Well, how should we feel about it? Well, in the letter to the Romans, Paul gave this advice. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. So if we do encounter a person who is better than us in some way or worse than us in some way, we shouldn't be thinking about how that reflects on us. That's a very self-centered and very vain way of thinking. What we should be thinking is, well, what does this mean for that person? So if a person is doing well and they're rejoicing, well, we should be rejoicing with them. Or if a person is doing poorly and they're sad or they're weeping, well, we should be feeling for them, weeping with them, trying to support them and comfort them. So the focus should be on them and not on ourselves. And we need to be humble in the opinions that we form about others. Not haughty, not proud, not conceited, because we think that we might somehow be better than them, wise in our own sight. But what if we have been the target of a lot of negative comments? People have made hurtful, damaging comments about us, and we feel that our reputation has been damaged. Well, what do we do then? Should we just, ignore it? Hope that it will pass? Well, interestingly, this is the kind of issue that Paul was dealing with in the next chapter, 2 Corinthians chapter 11. People that he sarcastically called super apostles were trying to make out that they were superior to him. And they were questioning his competency, and they were the ones that were making those disparaging comments about him and his appearance and trying to damage his reputation. And it's important to point out here that Paul's great concern with their behaviour was the potential for people to be led away from Christ. So we read in verse 3 of chapter 11, "But I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ." So he was concerned about the damage to the believers that would be caused by those people who were making criticisms about him and about his ministry. And if we find that we've been the ones that have been subject to attacks in social media or otherwise, and if we are feeling a need to defend ourselves, we've got to be checking ourselves that it is for the right reasons that we feel that we need to defend ourselves. It can't be motivated by wounded pride or because we want to assert that, no, we are the ones that are superior to others. It's got to have the right motivation. So Paul then goes on in chapter 11 to defend himself. And surprisingly, after what we've just considered, he goes on to boast about himself and compare himself with his critics, those super apostles. So in verses 22 and 23, he says, "Are they Hebrews? Well, so am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they offspring of Abraham? Well, so am I. Are they servants of Christ? I am a better one." Well, hang on. Isn't that exactly what he said we shouldn't do? Yeah? Didn't Paul say that it was not wise to be comparing ourselves with each other? Well, of course, he qualified all of that. In verse 21, he said that he was speaking as a fool. Yes, it is unwise to be speaking that way. And in verse 23, he said he was talking like a madman. So Paul didn't really want to go down this path. He was obviously quite reluctant to be speaking about himself and defending himself in that way. But he had to do it because he was defending the gospel against those who were attacking him and the things that he preached. When he goes on then to list his accomplishments, like his list of achievements, it's interesting what he includes in that list. He doesn't claim to be more knowledgeable than those critics of his. He doesn't claim to be a better teacher. He doesn't talk about having gained more converts than them. No, doesn't talk about any of those things. What he includes is a list of things that he suffered. So verse 23, continuing there. Greater labours, far more imprisonments, countless beatings, often near death. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes, less one. And if you continue on in chapter 11, there's many more things that he includes in that list of things that he suffered. So, why? Why does Paul highlight to the Corinthians all of those things that he suffered? Well, I think that what he's doing there is he is showing his genuineness to be an apostle. He's showing that his motivations were genuine. He's not trying to get them to focus on his appearance and the thing that he's accomplished, but rather that he is a genuine apostle, and that is proved by all of the things that he suffered and experienced in his life up to that point. So in a way, what he's doing is he's encouraging the Corinthians to not judge him by appearance, but look to his heart. Look to see that his heart was genuine, that he did have a genuine heart that an apostle of Christ should have. That was proved to be genuine through all of that suffering that he had gone through. Paul then finishes up his defense of himself in chapter 11 in a way that's also surprising. He says, verse 30, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. And then he goes on to describe a rather embarrassing incident, I guess, years before when he was living at Damascus and people were chasing him, how he escaped from them by being let down through a window in the wall of the city in a basket. Now, that doesn't fit the description of a courageous and powerful apostle, does it? That's not the sort of thing that a super apostle would do. So the point is that Paul was not trying to prove that he was better than others. He was quite happy for the Corinthians to know things about him that might appear to be weak. It wasn't all about appearance. He wanted to, I guess, show that he was not an apostle who was like impressive of appearance. He was one that had also humility. So, brothers and sisters and young people, we live in a time where there are unique challenges. Never before has it been possible to share content about ourselves to everyone around the world and to receive comments from anyone around the world. And never before has there been such an emphasis on image and appearance. Social media enables us to measure and compare ourselves with other people at a scale that has never before been possible. But this means we can be the target of hurtful and negative comments. This means we can also be made to feel inadequate and inferior through what we see, what we read about others. And many of us are left struggling with anxieties, struggling with depression. These are real problems of the 21st century, and yet the Bible still has a relevant message for us. As the Apostle Paul wrote to the Corinthians, measuring ourselves and comparing ourselves with other people is unwise. We should judge not by appearance, but we should look to people's hearts. We should not worry about what other people think about us. What's most important is what God thinks of us. It is His commendation that counts. So now we have an opportunity to again examine ourselves as we take this bread and this wine. This opportunity to think again about our Lord. So let us all boast in Him and not in ourselves. May we all now be inspired by our Lord and what He has done, by what was in His heart, by His compassion, by His love for us, His complete dedication to His Father, His never once giving in to temptation, His overcoming sin and death. Let us boast in the Lord, that we might share in His victory.